Hi there and welcome to a new episode of Extreme Banding, the slow YouTube camera channel dealing with various photographic nightmares. I am living in one of them right now, December in the north of Sweden. Weather is so-so and the sun never rises. There's no time or place for photography. So what can you do? Think about which all-mechanical rangefinder camera with a cost below 1,000 euros you would like to use for the rest of your life, perhaps.
What I find most impressive about Leica is, they went from this, made a very small upgrade to this, and then while the other camera manufacturers tried in a lot of different ways to improve on this camera, Leica went immediately from this to this, and they have basically stayed there since. So this is the Leica M2 from 1957. Of course, what they did here as an improvement to this one, a combined viewfinder rangefinder. The M3 was the first, but this was the second. The difference was change of magnification there and another thing I will get to. So combined viewfinder rangefinder, long rangefinder base, a lever wind, and a new system for film loading. Still bottom loading, but made easier. I've shown you earlier the standard bottom loading and trimming the lever. There's still the recommendation here, but the reason for trimming the leader is to get past these sprockets so the film gets into the correct place. On the Leica M2 you still have to remove the spool, put it in place like this, but then you really don't have to trim the leader, as you can just kind of guide it into the right place, and then you just start winding. And so of course you can still, as it is a Leica camera, you can still put it upside down. They went away from this with the M4 because they changed the rewind crank. What did they do? It is bigger than this one, about the same size as the other smaller variations from other manufacturers with a combined viewfinder rangefinder. So they made it bigger, heavier, 560 grams more or less, a new lens mount but fully compatible with the older screw mount lenses. So this one has a longer effective base with a 1.5 finder, but not with a 1:1 finder. The base length on this one is about 49 millimeters, and on this one 58 maybe. And so the M3 is even better in that regard. A non-rotating dial, of course. The lever wind. This is the nicest lever wind I have ever tried. Well, it's hard not to prefer it over a knob wind. It is just so nice to wind. You can walk around all day and just wind and press the shutter. It has, the nicest shutter sound. The viewfinder is, the eyepiece is pretty big. Rewind crank, no problem. And as we've gone through before, an impressive thing, the placement of the shutter button. This camera, there are variations with a self-timer here, which I don't like since it gets in the way of your fingers. They managed to widen the rangefinder base, still keep the shutter button in a perfect spot, and make it so you don't want to put your finger where the rangefinder window is. And they did so by managing to move this one further to the side and moving this window more to this side than in, for example, the Fed 2 and Soki 5 and Soki 6. Fantastic camera. I understand why they still keep this shape and form, because I think it is just perfection. They also, of course, added frame lines that were parallax corrected. So here's the viewfinder of the Leica M2. As you can see, the 50mm frame lines are very easy to see. So even with glasses you would see the frame lines. Easy to compose, parallax correct. The rangefinder patch is extremely easy to see. Well, it is the easiest one to focus of all these cameras, I would say. So that's the 50mm frame line. This is the 35, so you can just about see it in the edges, but I wouldn't say it's comfortable, and I would almost have preferred, a hard edge instead of this. Of course, this is parallax corrected and so on. And then you have the 85mm, and that is of course a bit small for 0.7 finder. Ideal for 50, doable for 35, but of course you can probably get used to it, and a lot of people think this is great. So later Leica M's have a cluttered viewfinder, but the M2 only has 85, 50 and 35 by itself, and no extra frame lines in the middle. And well, it's not the brightest finder. It's not as bright as a Soki 5 or as the Canon L1, but it's nice to look through. Another downgrade to the M3 is that one has an automatically resetting frame counter, and this one you have to put it at 0 when you've loaded a film. But to me that seems like a small trade-off. So for the size, impossible to beat. The only way you can challenge is by size and weight. And then these come into play again, because these are really smaller and therefore have clear advantages in that regard. This one is a superior experience if size and weight is not a big thing for you. This one is also pricier. Probably better value if you have the money. You can just as well keep your money in a Leica M than in a bank account. If you need the money, you could sell it for the same value or maybe higher value. But at the same time, it might feel better to walk around with something that's not as expensive. For me, I actually think I still prefer to use this one. If I want to use a 50, I can use a collapsible and just keep it in my pocket. And if I want to use something else, I can use an auxiliary finder. And I like 28mm lenses, which would mean an auxiliary finder for both of these. And then this one would clearly have an advantage when it comes to size. This one has better shutter speeds, but you can always use ND filters as well if you don't want to shoot stopped down, which I do with these cameras. When challenging this in the same size and weight class as, for example, the Canon P, it's a no contest. But this one is much cheaper and it is still a super camera, and you won't see on the images which camera you used.
The Leica M2 is the cheapest of the Leica M's. It also has some advantages over the later versions, like a so-called non-cluttered viewfinder, as well as 1950s build quality. It is top-notch when it comes to ergonomics, shutter sound, winding, and viewfinder. Although it is the cheapest rangefinder M, the main downside is still the price. It just about qualifies for this series' €1,000 limit, and there are a lot of capable cameras that can be had for a lot less. But if you want the best rangefinder camera and don't mind the price, a Leica M is an obvious choice. However, if you want something more compact and scaled down, that is even nicer in hand, there is always the Barnack.